All right, I wanted to do a quick video going over this new substance being developed for hair loss treatment called PP405. First, doing a quick review of what it actually is, what is the chemical, and how does it work on the hair follicles. And then number two, I want to ask some key questions and set some key conditions that I think are going to be really important to have answered over the next year or so to figure out if this is really going to be a essential cure to the hair loss problem or go a really long way to fixing the problem that is hair loss. So PP405 is a new hair loss treatment substance being developed by a company called Pelage Pharmaceuticals, which is an offshoot of researchers at UCLA, the University of California at Los Angeles. I'm just going to read the actual definition of the chemical online that I found. So PP405 is an experimental, non-hormonal topical treatment being developed to stimulate hair growth by reactivating dormant hair follicles. It works by inhibiting the mitochondrial pyruvate carrier, MPC, which flips a metabolic switch in the follicle stem cells from a dormant state to an active growing state. So it's not available on the commercial market right now. It's currently undergoing human trials. It's in phase 2 right now, so in the United States. So we're looking at maybe within the next few years, something that could be available on the commercial market. So remember, male pattern genetic hair loss occurs due to the thinning and the miniaturization of the hair follicles over time. And that is a consequence of DHT, dihydrotestosterone's effects, its damage that it causes to the hair follicles over time. The hair follicles have a genetic sensitivity to DHT, and DHT clings to the hair follicles and makes them thin out, and then eventually they enter a completely dormant phase where they no longer grow hair at all. So the two major hair loss treatments that have been on the commercial market for a long time now, finasteride and minoxidil, they have limitations. Finasteride decreases the amount of DHT in your whole body, leaving less to damage the hair follicles over time. The catch is you have to start it kind of early on in your hair loss journey, otherwise it's not going to regrow a whole bunch of your hair. And minoxidil, which is most commonly used as a topical substance that you rub in, it increases the strength of hairs and hair growth with vasodilation by increasing blood flow to the area, as far as we know, but it cannot regrow a bunch of hair on a completely bare area of the scalp. The theory is that once a hair shaft loses about 50% of its original shaft diameter that you had in youth through miniaturization, it cannot be regrown to full strength ever again, at least with existing treatments. It essentially enters a completely dormant, which is a resting phase, where it doesn't grow hair at all, or it'll grow very, very weak peach fuzz type hair. So this PP405 substance works in a way that completely bypasses DHT's effects on the hair follicles. There's a lot of complicated scientific terms I'm not going to get into today, but what PP405 does is it flips this metabolic switch in the stem cells to tell the hair follicles to actively grow hair at full strength, regardless of what DHT is doing to it. So it doesn't have any effect on DHT at all, but it basically programs the hair follicles to grow hair regardless of DHT. PP405 is being trialed on humans in a topical cream formulation, something that you apply topically to the scalp once every day. As of October 2025, it has gone through both phase 1 and phase 2A human trials, and apparently, according to the reports and the studies released so far, it is regrowing thick terminal hair on completely bare areas of the scalp in Norwood 3 to 5 individuals. So this is not just regrowing peach fuzz vellus hair, this is apparently regrowing thick terminal full strength hair on completely bare areas of the scalp. The phase 1 trials showed that PP405 was well tolerated with no systemic absorption. That's a big thing in this. They want to avoid systemic absorption since it has effects on the mitochondria and the stem cells. It's something that they much want to keep in the scalp. The phase 2A study, which was completed earlier this year in 2025, showed that 31% of participants who took the PP405 and used it once a day showed at least a 20% increase in hair density in just 4 weeks of use and after 8 weeks of starting. So basically what they did was they applied it once a day for 4 weeks in a row and then stopped and then waited another 4 weeks to measure the results. So 8 weeks later in total is when they discovered that 31% of them showed at least a 20% increase in hair density. Some of the leaders of the trials confirmed that it's thick terminal hair that's growing, not just peach fuzz. So this looks very promising, right? It's nothing else on the market to date has ever achieved this level of regrowth on completely bare areas, long bare areas that lost hair a long time ago. So if it's really regrowing and activating that long dormant hair, that could be the true cure that everybody is looking for the hair loss problem. And as far as I've read here, the phase 2B trials, which is a longer study than the 2A, and phase 3 trials will be completed by 2026, sometime next year, with commercial market availability of PP405 possibly becoming available by 2027 to 2030 if things go well and it gets FDA approved in the United States. Of course, there's the possibility for gray market versions to be produced sooner than that if the drug formulation becomes available and known to the public. There is some research and investigation being done right now. Some people think they do know what the actual substance is and how to create it in a lab. So there's ongoing research on that. So it's possible that gray market versions could become available sooner than that. So now for a little bit, I want to get into why I think PP405 is so promising and why it would be a preferred type of hair loss treatment as opposed to other current treatments that exist on the market, including transplants, hair systems, doing nothing, using topical treatments, oral treatments, etc. I've long believed that the best ultimate way to treat or cure the hair loss problem will be to somehow regrow all that original hair that we've lost and reactivate those follicles that are still in our scalps, because transplants are expensive and they require a lot of proper physical procedural elements to go really well and to be performed to high quality by human surgeons and technicians to produce a good look. So there's a lot that can go wrong with hair transplants, and you see that all the time with people who get hair transplants done that do not end up looking very good or natural. Of course, there's the math problem with hair transplants too. If you've lost basically all the original hair on your head, you're a Norwood 6 or 7, you have very limited options with a hair transplant. Just the math, it doesn't work. You're never going to be able to transplant a high enough density on the top. And this other strategy being developed called hair cloning, which has been researched for a few decades now and is, trying to be developed right now, it could become physically possible. However, the logistics of it in the real world would seem really, really unreasonable to me. Let me explain why. So even if researchers do succeed in cloning hair follicles, right? Taking your existing hair follicles and duplicating them, cloning them into many, many thousands successfully that are alive and will grow. Even if they achieve that, the donor hair follicles from your scalp would have to be extracted, then cloned in a lab, producing thousands more of them, which would then have to be cared for very properly and then implanted into the areas of hair loss like current transplants are done. So who would actually clone the hair follicles? Most regular hair transplant clinics aren't going to have the science or the procedures to do that. So are there going to be special like hair cloning labs that do the actual cloning? And then the hair transplant clinics are going to have to take your hair follicles and ship them to a cloning lab, and then they're going to have to clone them and then care for them properly and make them not die in the process and then ship them back to be implanted at the hair transplant clinic. I just don't understand the logistics of how that would ever happen. So would there have to be like just a few special clinics, hair transplant clinics that do clone the follicles on site? And if so, that would be a few and far in between the number of places that would do that. They would be extremely expensive and inaccessible to most people. So this entire process just seems really unrealistic to me of hair cloning, to become available to most people. And even if it did become available and you could have it done, it would probably be so extremely expensive that it would only be available to the most wealthy individuals, and it would not be an option for everybody else. So again, the best way, in my opinion, to cure the hair loss problem is to find a biological or chemical way to reactivate the existing hair follicles that are still in the scalp that have been in a dormant phase and are just not growing any hair anymore. So PP405 seems to do that in a very direct way that has no effect on hormones or cardiovascular system or anything like that. Like minoxidil can have cardio effects. Obviously, the 5-alpha reductase inhibitors like finasteride, dutasteride have hormonal effects. PP405 does not affect any of that. It just basically programs the stem cells in the hair follicles to grow the hair. So if that ends up being true and we end up seeing pictures and real physical evidence of that happening in the trials over the next year, that'll be amazing to going a long way to curing the hair loss problem. Still, with all of that said, there are a few major questions that I have and a few conditions that I want to see met to make PP405 a true ultimate fix to hair loss. So let's get into those few conditions that I really want to see answered. Number one, it must regrow thick terminal hair on completely bare or peach fuzz only areas of the scalp. So people with minor hair loss, so from Norwood 1 to Norwood 3, they can already get some decent regrowth in many cases from finasteride and minoxidil use, right? If their hair loss is fairly recent and fairly minor, they can actually get some decent regrowth with finasteride and minoxidil existing treatments on the market. So PP405 is really going to be a thing that people who have a lot of hair loss or who lost their hair a long time ago will be interested in, right? We're looking at those Norwood 4s to 7s, people who have lost a ton of their original hair. Can PP405 regrow thick terminal hair on those patients? If it can, then it will be a resounding success. And the other part of that is the density and the actual number of hairs that it will regrow, right? So, of course, based on the trial, we know that at least 31% of patients saw at least a 20% increase in density, hair density, in just 8 weeks. But, that has a lot of variance, right? So if somebody only has 100 hairs across the entire top of their head, which is not very many, a 20% increase in density would just be a regrowth of 20 new hairs, which is really not that much, and you would not barely notice hardly anything in that case. Of course, the trial was also time limited. That's only 8 weeks of use, right? So is this something that is going to continue to reactivate the hair over time with continued use, or is that sort of the maximum effect of it? That will be a key question to answer. It depends on the number of hairs on your head, right? If you have 10,000 hairs on your head still, a 20% increase in density would be 2,000 new hairs grown, right? So that would be a significant increase. So what we're hoping though is for continued reactivation and regrowth over a longer period of time. Condition number 2 that I want to see met. Hopefully PP405 will not need to be used every single day forever to get its maximum effects. Now, I'm not saying that it's impossible for people to use it every single day forever, but as a topical cream or gel formulation, it does become very annoying to have to apply to the entire scalp every single day. And most people are going to be highly annoyed with having to apply it every single day forever to get the full results, especially with hair of any length. If you have short hair, a buzz cut, it's not that hard to apply topicals to the entire head. But if you have medium length or longer length hair, it becomes very annoying to have to apply a gel or a cream to the whole scalp every single day. It's very annoying to fit into your schedule. Most people would do it before they go to bed. It's just, but then it sort of gets messy in your hair. It requires that you have to wash your hair every single morning, and that's just a lot for people to deal with. So what we're really hoping for is that maybe PP405 could just be used periodically in on and off cycles of some kind, right? So maybe use it for a few weeks on, then take a few weeks off, or something, maybe just a few days a week, something to kick the hair follicles back into their full growing phase for at least a period of time before needing another boost. All right, so that's a big thing that I think we should hope for. We should hope that PP405 doesn't have to be used every single day forever to get its maximum effects. If it can meet that condition, that will go a really long way in making it a true cure for the hair loss problem. And condition number 3 that I want to see become true at some point is it must become available at a relatively affordable price, preferably over the counter. All right, so I don't see why it wouldn't become available over the counter based on all the info we have so far, as long as it doesn't go systemic and there are no negative health risks from using it. If there were for some reason and it would go systemic, then it, something that a doctor might have to prescribe. But so far we don't see any evidence of that. We see it constrained to the hair follicles and the scalp only, sort of like minoxidil is available over the counter. So it should become available over the counter. I'm not worried about that part. The price must be relatively affordable, like most products that you would buy in a drugstore or a shopping center. There is a lot of leeway on this, obviously, because I think people would be willing to pay even like hundreds of dollars a month to get PP405 if it's going to regrow entire bare areas of hair loss on the scalp. Okay, if it's true that it's going to be that successful of a substance, people will be willing to spend hundreds of dollars a month. I don't even know if it would be that much. It might become, much more affordable than that, but it can't be something that's going to be, thousands and thousands of dollars or available to just a select few population, right? It's going to have to become available over the counter. and based on safety data and safety trials. And then just a few final questions that I still have about PP405. Number one, if it successfully regrows thick hair on completely bare areas of the scalp, what's the maximum amount of time that somebody could have lived with hair loss previously and still get that regrowth from PP405? So in other words, is there a point at which after, you've reached that amount of time, the miniaturized dormant follicles completely die and can no longer physically produce hair no matter what, even if exposed to the PP405? Is there a time where that does occur? And if so, what is this time measurement? Is it 10 years? Is it 25 years? 50 years? Is there no limit at all? That's a question that hasn't completely been answered, although most scientists do think that most of the time the hair follicles just enter a dormant phase, but the hair follicles are still there in the scalp. They don't die out or disappear completely. So in theory, there shouldn't really be a pressing time limit like 5 years or 10 years to which you would say, oh my gosh, I just passed the 10-year mark of my hair follicles, no longer growing hair. Unfortunately, PP405 won't work. I don't think that's going to be the case, but hopefully that holds true, and hopefully PP405 can reactivate long dormant hair follicles. There's this concept called fibrosis, which is like a tissue scarring process that can occur, like scar tissue on your skin, that can also occur sometimes on the scalp. So if that occurs around the hair follicles, then it's possible that the hair follicles could be prevented from growing hair ever again, even if PP405 acts on it. But I don't think most people have that type of hair loss, right? If you have like scarring hair loss, then, that's the topic for another time. But most people who lose their hair due to genetic male pattern hair loss, they don't have fibrosis, okay? At least not within, a few decades. As always, it's probably just good to keep the scalp healthy and damage free for as long as you can, right? So use moisturizer, sunscreen, if you have a bare scalp, things like that. Keep it healthy and treat it well over the years until this PP405 becomes available for us. And one final question that I have: how would hair regrowth from PP405 look on people who have already had hair transplants like me? If just some of the original hair that we have would regrow from PP405, then you basically combine that, that newly added density with the existing hair transplant density, and it should end up looking good. It should end up looking, very thick, like your hair did before you experienced hair loss. In the best case, most ideal of all scenarios, where the PP405 would regrow basically all of your original hair on the top of your head, then you would basically have like super density because you have the hair transplanted density, and then you would add all the original density. So you might have like a super density on top, which would be weird. I don't know how that would actually look. I don't think we have to worry about that though. I really don't think that it's going to be possible to regrow 100% of all our original hair. Another question is, would scalp trauma from hair transplant implantation of grafts permanently damage or kill the original follicles that are in your scalp that are dormant, making PP405 not work on them? It's possible that hair transplanting could damage or kill the existing follicles that are there. However, I think the math makes it likely that most of the original hair follicles are probably not affected by a hair transplant. Like, for example, I got 11,100 total grafts implanted in my hair transplants, but my original hair count when I was a kid before I experienced hair loss was probably something like 50,000 hair on the top of my head or more. So the hair transplants that went into the top are probably spread out in a way that they don't impact most of the original hair that is there. So hopefully most of the dormant hair follicle that was there originally is not damaged or affected by the hair transplants and will be able to be regrown by the PP405. And then one final thing we have to remember, of course, is that donor areas, the back and sides that are taken for hair transplants, they would not be able to improve with PP405 application because those hair follicles that have been taken from there are not there anymore. So PP405 can't magically regrow hair out of a scalp when there's no more hair follicles. It's not regenerating hair follicles that disappeared, that have been relocated, right? So if you have had a lot of hair extracted from your donor area, you're stuck with that look, unfortunately, forever with the PP405 route. But that's not going to be a problem for most people because most people have not experienced over harvesting in their donor area. If you have, then you have to look into other treatment options like maybe SMP to hide the visual thinning, or, hair transplanting into the donor areas themselves. But remember, PP405 is only going to reactivate existing hair follicles wherever they are on the scalp. So the donor area will not receive any visual increase in density from PP405. It'll only affect the original hair that was on the top of the head that is now in a dormant phase. All right, that's all I have on PP405 for now. That's all the information we have to date. So let's keep paying attention to the human trials that are ongoing and see what new information we get on the effects of it. Maybe we'll see some pictures, some physical evidence of the regrowth eventually. That would be great to evaluating if this really can go a long way to becoming a true cure or big fix for the problem of hair loss. See you around.